we're going to go ahead and jump in and begin. So, first of all, I would like to welcome everybody to Gettysburg National Military Park. My name's Angie Atkinson. I'm one of the supervisory park rangers here at the battlefield. And I used to do this all the time. I would be out in the field doing programs. I don't get to do it a lot now. I mostly focus on managing the licensed battlefield guide force. But, as Jim knows, but every once in a while I get to jump back in and do some programs. So we have, if anybody has the anniversary program guide, I forgot to bring some out today, but it's a black and white booklet. You can get it at the visitor center. Please, jump on any and all of these programs that you can do today. I actually bookend the day, shameless self-promotion. So I start at 8:30 today, and then I'm doing the campfire at 8:30 tonight. So in between, there are all sorts of things that you can do. We hope you get out on these programs and enjoy and commemorate the 155th Battle of Gettysburg anniversary with us. Jumping into our program today on July 2nd, show of hands, how many people did some of the real times or the battle walks yesterday?
Well, attempted.
Attempted, didn't quite make it, that's fine, that's fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a recap of day one very quickly. That will then segue us into why Lee and Meade plan and think the way they do. So July 1st, 1863, the battle had raged pretty much all day. Starting very early in the morning, for those of you that participated in the battle walk at around 10 o'clock. First shot launching at 7:30, but the main infantry action beginning around 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. Lull at noontime. Afternoon action begins again around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, the Confederate Army, led by General Robert E. Lee, had come up to Pennsylvania not to fight an offensive campaign. They were not going to be the aggressor. They were not going to be the attacker. In battle, they were going to do so sort of strategically by coming north, crossing the Mason-Dixon border. But when it came down to battle, Lee was very, very particular in that he did not want his army launching attacks and engaging in battle. He is in enemy territory. He is operating a significant distance from his supply base, which is down in Stanton, Virginia. And every day that he moves, he takes on casualties, whether it be men down from the sun, down from illness, or eventually in battle. So he's got this in his mind. But July 1 completely disrupts that plan. He is thrust into battle because of a variety of reasons, and he will have to shift and turn the tide. Initially, when the battle begins in the morning, he's, still of the opinion we don't want to get involved. But by the afternoon, the situation changing, he realizes that an offensive attack might be to the Confederate Army's benefit. And by the end of the day on July 4, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he's actually correct. The Confederate Army will have moved the Union Army from their positions on McPherson's Ridge and Seminary Ridge and send them retreating back through the town of Gettysburg onto Cemetery Hill. We can locate Cemetery Hill from our position. You might have to maneuver around the monument a little bit. But as you look across the farm fields, there are two small white buildings kind of just where the trees begin. Those are the structures of the Abraham Bryan farm. Abraham Bryan was a free African American who lived here during the time of the battle. He wasn't here during the actual days. Many of the African American community evacuated because of the Confederate Army presence. But Cemetery Hill is just to the left of those buildings if you look at the distant tree line. The Union Army could not hold their position. It was not tenable. It was not a secure position. And they didn't have the rest of the Union Army up and ready to support. Lee will look at July 1 as a victory. Now, what about the Union Army? The Union Army is commanded by General George Gordon Meade. He has taken command 3 days prior to the Battle of Gettysburg. Nobody's going to know that. We know that because of hindsight, of course. But he takes command 3 days prior to the start of the battle. The previous commander of the Union Army, General Joe Hooker, resigned, was fired. That's a whole other story. But he did not keep his corps commanders, the guys right under him, really in the loop. So Meade, now taking over command, is spending time getting abreast of the situation. Where are the other corps commanders? Where are the armies? What roads, or where are the corps? What roads are they using? What supplies do we have? What numbers do we have in case we end up in battle? Now, Meade's original thought was that a defensive line in Maryland might be the best option. And he is going to draft up what's called the Pipe Creek Circular. It's going to be a document that's going to outline what we're going to do in Maryland if this battle happens. Because Meade has a primary purpose when it comes to the Confederate Army. What is Meade supposed to be doing while the Confederate Army is advancing north? Anybody know?
Protect Washington.
Protect Washington, D.C. So, to give you maybe a better picture of this, to the west we have the Blue Ridge Mountains. You might be able to see them through the trees. A little hazy. But these mountains run north and south, okay, much like this roadway. Let's use the roadway as our mountains, West Confederate Avenue. The Confederate Army is on the western side of those, using the mountains as a screen to hide their movements. The Union Army is on this side, following, pursuing, however you'd like to couch that. But the one thing that Meade is always going to have behind him and his army is Washington, D.C. However Lee moves up across or behind these mountains, however he moves into south central Pennsylvania, Meade constantly has to keep his eyes this way so that he can track where Lee is to protect the capital city behind him. And, you know, when we do some educational programs for youngsters, you know, tactics are maybe a little bit difficult, so I kind of equate it to capture the flag. If Lee is able to get a direct line into Washington, D.C. and capture that flag, the game is pretty much up for the Union Army. They only have one more army down in Mississippi, commanded by General Grant, that they could potentially fall back to with any sort of speed, and even that probably wouldn't result in any success. So Meade has to constantly protect Washington, D.C. In doing so, as the armies move north and engage in battle on July 1, he's keeping that in mind. He has brought his men up the Emmitsburg Road, traffic arriving on it in the center of the battlefields here. The Taneytown Road on the other side of that, the Baltimore Pike on the other side of that. Always looking for avenues to protect that capital city. He was not planning on a battle in Gettysburg, neither was General Robert E. Lee. There is nothing in Gettysburg that necessarily attracts someone to have battle here, but it happened. So now as the Union Army is retreating, Meade is 12 miles away, back in Taneytown, Maryland. He has had commanders on the field managing the situation. Unfortunately, John Reynolds, commander of the Union First Corps, is mortally wounded very early in the fight. And so there's a little bit of a command vacuum as individuals are changing responsibilities. But you have these two armies that didn't necessarily expect to fight here, didn't expect to have an all-day battle here, and it's debatable whether or not the Union Army expected to lose here, at least on the first day. The Union Army is not coming off of a number of victories. If we go back through 1863 into 1862, May of 1863 we have Chancellorsville. Union Army loses. We go back a little bit further to December, we're talking some big battles. December of 1862, Fredericksburg. Union Army loses. September of 1862, Battle of Antietam. A tie, a draw, depending on how you look at it. But I will also tell you, at each of those battles, there was a different Army commander. And that's not good for continuity of operations. Think about that in your workplace. How would you like your manager to change every 3 months? Probably wouldn't help with consistency in performance. Maybe it would, I don't know. But now that the Union Army's retreated, now that the Confederates have launched an offense, now we have a different day in front of us. what are these two individuals going to do on July 2nd, 1863? You know, the best battle plans are drafted, they're meticulous, we've got people moving here, we know we got numbers here, this is how we're going to set it up. But anytime you do that, and when you get on the field and when the action opens, you take that battle plan, you move it aside, and you manage what is happening, right? You can have the best battle plan, but as soon as that soldier takes that first step forward, you might as well just move it to the side and be prepared for things not to happen the way you would plan. So what are these commanders thinking? Let's start with Lee. He was the victor of July 1. Lee now has a dilemma, I think, in front of him. Do we retreat, or not retreat, do we revert back to, we're going to be defensive, or do we remain on the offense? Now keep in mind, Lee's reasons for invading, crush the Union Army, and end the Civil War, potentially, and or capture Washington, D.C. So if you've come off a string of victories, and now you have a victory in the North, also keep in mind, this is the first time that the North proper, above the Mason-Dixon, has seen battle. Okay, Gettysburg is somewhat of an anomaly. Most of the battles are happening in Virginia. So Lee has a couple things that are kind of churning in his mind. Do we continue to be offensive in nature? Is that still going to work? Can we crush the Union Army and achieve our objectives? Now Lee's got some things that are going against him at this point. Does anybody know what Lee is struggling with on this campaign?
His command.
His command?
His command structure. Lieutenants and stuff.
His command structure, well, he's got a lot of new people, and in a different format. They've restructured, they've made it 3 corps now. They've got new people in charge, definitely.
He didn't have Jeb Stuart.
Well, he did, but he didn't. So Jeb Stuart is the commander of the Confederate cavalry. All right, these are guys on horseback. All right, they ride horses. They're supposed to be scouting. They're supposed to be getting intelligence and information. They're supposed to ride around the enemy and gather numbers and what roads are they on, and you know what's the rumor mill, what's happening, and capture stuff, wagon trains, supplies, things like that. Lee has Stuart, but if we kind of continue our road as the mountain thing, Stuart is 30 miles that way, and in between Stuart and Lee is the Union Army. Stuart, in this cavalry position, cavalry commander leadership position, should have been reporting back to Lee, letting him know what roads the Union Army is on, who's commanding, how many men, approximate days of march, what towns are they in. Lee's not getting any of that because Stuart is, number one, way over yonder. He's slowed down by the capture of supplies of a wagon train, and as the Union Army advances north, so does Stuart, but he can't get across to get to Lee. He will ride through the town I grew up in. It takes me an hour to get here by car. Okay? And then he goes up to Dover toward York, and then he's got to come over. I mean, this is a massive amount of distance, especially, I almost said on foot, on horseback. You're not going to cover that quickly. So Lee is dealing with a new command structure and not a lot of information. And I think I mentioned his supplies a few minutes ago, right? 150 miles away. Now, he does want to operate up in the north because, hello, it hasn't been touched. You know, General Early came through here June 26th to gather supplies. He's got to feed his army off of whatever he can find. So Lee is struggling with some of those things. We may not, and maybe in contemporary times we wouldn't have said he's struggling, but he's got those things against him. He does not know the strength of the Union Army. He does not know where the Union Army is. That is a significant problem when you don't know kind of in its entirety where the Union Army is located. But Lee likes the fact that day one, we call it day one, ends in victory. Because that moves him that much closer to his objective. which is to crush the Union Army and potentially capture Washington, D.C. And so why not? He has had victories through the spring of 1863 into the winter of 1862. Why not continue this push? He knows by experience that the Union Army can be outgeneraled. Lee has been in some predicaments, and he has pulled out victory time and time again. Why can't he do it here? So Lee will look to plan. Now, when the Union Army retreated to Cemetery Hill, the Confederate Army was also able to eventually advance to almost where we are standing. And they would start to construct their battle line, or eventually what would become their battle line. Again, if we use the road, we can say that part of the army was here, and eventually would curve around the town of Gettysburg to the east. It's a very large fishhook. Unfortunately for Lee, because the Union Army is over there, he will have something called exterior lines, which means that from the far east at Culp's Hill, if we want to get troops from Culp's Hill over there to the east, down here to the west, they're not just going to shoot across the fields. The Union Army's in the way. They're going to have to go all the way around behind the town of Gettysburg, behind this road, this ridge, I should say, and down to wherever they need to be placed. Where is Lee going to it now? So Lee's got to consider that. Yeah, there's time, there's movement of troops, and the entire Confederate Army is not here yet. Also, where is it likely that he will attack? Well, he had given some discretionary orders the evening of July 1st to General Richard Ewell. Take that hill if practicable. Try and take Culp's Hill over to the east. If we can get on that high ground, maybe we can end this thing. That doesn't happen. That's a whole other program. It doesn't happen, and so it leaves the possibility to attack on the morning of July 2nd. Now there's going to be some discussions with Ewell and Ewell's division commanders, and they're kind of going to put the kibosh on that. They're going to be like, it's not really a good plan. They're not going to say that to him. They're going to be a lot more tactful. But trying to scale Culp's Hill, in fact, one soldier even wrote that they would have to use scaling ladders to get to the top of it, was not going to be fruitful in accomplishing what Lee needed to accomplish. So Lee's going to send out a scouting party very early in the morning, July 2nd, to find out where the end of the Union line is. Remember, he doesn't know. So Captain Samuel Johnston on horseback with a couple other individuals heads to the south, riding behind the ridges here, heading to the south with orders, directions to get to Little Round Top. The hill's off in the distance to your right. Big Round Top is the one fully wooded, olive trees. Little Round Top is the one that looks like the front was recently logged. So Johnson is told, get down there, find out where the left of the Union Army is. Find out where the end is. Supposedly Johnson does. For our point of reference, it's the Pennsylvania Monument, which if you're looking out to the field, you'll see a red barn with 3 white spires on the top. There is a domed structure to the left of the trees. It's got an angel on top. That's the Pennsylvania Memorial. And so approximately in that area, that's where the Union line ends. Lee now can come up with a little bit of a different plan. We're not going to attack to the east. We're not going to attack Culp's Hill. It's going to be much too difficult, much too fortified. We can't get our guys up there. How about we attack the flank of the Union line? Attacking the flank is one primary objective in Civil War battles. If you can get on the end of the line, you have the advantage. So we're kind of set up here. We have this group of individuals. What Lee wanted to do was basically run another line of soldiers this way, much like you guys are standing, and so that they could attack in this fashion against the Union Army. What that does is when you're standing there in battle line, if I'm in the Union battle line and the Confederates are coming from that direction, which they would have been, and I have my musket, my rifle, if I'm going to fire straight at the enemy, great, got it, clear shot, all right, relatively. If I have somebody attacking on my flank, I have to kind of angle myself at a 45 or an oblique And that's fine until the rest of my Union line gets in the way. You know, if they're over here, that's great, but if I have to aim down here and I've got, 100, 300 other guys down here, that's not going to work. So the only thing you can do is change front. You don't just take, 10,000 guys and say, okay, get out there. That takes some time. So even changing front to adapt to that attack would be significant. And Lee knows that. That's why, and all the commanders know that. That's why you want to attack on the flank. Roll them up, crush them. He's going to talk with General Richard Ewell, and first he's going to say, launch the attack at the same time, get it rolling. Eventually he's going to say, no, just create a diversion. And so that's the initial morning plan for Robert E. Lee. He's got information. Union Army's right there. How can I attack? Well, the best opportunity seems to be right here. The only thing he now needs to wait for is more men. He needs to wait for men from Longstreet's Corps who have been told to march to arrive at Gettysburg. But again, things don't happen quickly. We just don't jump in trucks and, Jeeps and things like that to arrive at said destination. You got to pack up camp, there might be other orders, you've got thousands of men to get ready, and sometimes it takes hours before they can even step off. Then you're on the road, potentially behind other soldiers, behind wagon trains. It could take a while. So they've had their orders to get to Gettysburg, but they're not here yet. So we can't do anything, we can't launch until Longstreet's men arrive on the field. Lee needs those fresh troops. Remember, every day that somebody's in battle, they are battle weary. And it doesn't mean that they haven't taken on injuries, that they're not ill themselves. They very well may be. But they may have been triaged to the point where you're fine, get back in there. So he needs those fresh troops to arrive on the field. So Lee's thinking the morning of July 2nd is we're going to continue on the offense. We're going to try and launch this attack as soon as we can the morning of the 2nd and hopefully crush the Union position. Now what is Meade thinking? Meade's got to regroup a little bit. He's not defeated by any stretch of the imagination, but he's got to regroup and figure out what's going on. Meade will arrive on the battlefield about midnight, July 1st. He will arrive at the Evergreen Cemetery gatehouse. It's the brick gatehouse that has the archway. He will then start to take a look over the field, and he will meet with some of his commanders. He needs to learn the terrain. He needs to learn what he can use to create the best possible defensive position. Meade had thought about an offensive attack in the morning of July 2nd. You want to launch in the morning because everybody's still slow to start. It doesn't allow for more troops to arrive, and the element of surprise a little bit. The more the day goes on, the more things can change. But after scouting some positions, after talking to some of his corps commanders, it was decided that they would remain in a defensive mode. That they would not launch an attack the morning of the 2nd. They were just basically going to see what was going to happen. But Meade did need to secure his line. He did need to secure his position. And as the arrival of more and more men and commands are on the field, he has that ability. So the Union's 2nd Corps is going to eventually be placed along Cemetery Ridge directly to our front. Keep in mind, these guys aren't shoulder to shoulder, but generally speaking. From the Abraham Bryan Farm roughly down to the Pennsylvania Memorial. All right, in fits and starts, Meade will have men available to guard that position. The Union 3rd Corps, commanded by a guy named General Dan Sickles, is also arriving on the field. In fact, coming up the Emmitsburg Road and cutting off at what is the Peach Orchard, known as the Peach Orchard today. Sickles' men have had one heck of a time getting here, and that's going to continue the story through the battle. But nonetheless, they're about 10,000 strong. And Meade knows this, and he wants to utilize them in the best way possible. Well, since the 2nd Corps is already between the Bryan Farm and the Pennsylvania Memorial, we've got the 3rd Corps, and we've got high ground to the south. Meade sees those hills. He knows about those hills. He's only really had a Signal Corps unit on there, handful of guys on the hill. And he says, we need to make sure we secure that high ground. Think about the pieces of high ground Meade now has. Culp's Hill to the east, Cemetery Hill to roughly the north, and he wants to secure the high ground to the south. 3 solid anchor points for him. So he will instruct General Dan Sickles to place his 3rd Corps next to the Union 2nd Corps. Basically, attach yourself to the left of the 2nd Corps and extend your line down to and on top of Little Round Top. If Meade can secure this, he is in a strong defensive position, and he believes that he can withstand any type of attack that Lee might throw at him. Lee had wanted to attack in the morning, and time will tick by. Meade wants Sickles to fill that gap and secure the high ground to the south, and time will tick by. And eventually, Meade will be informed that General Dan Sickles is not in that position. That Dan Sickles has taken it upon himself to conduct a forward movement out to what we now refer to as the Peach Orchard. So, we'll use the fence here. If I was Dan Sickles and I was to connect to the Union 2nd Corps and I was to fill this gap, those are my orders. I will opt to not follow those orders, and I will advance my 10,000 men 3/4 of a mile in front of that position. And what that does is if I'm the last person, if I'm the last soldier right here that advanced, I have a gap now between me and the Union 2nd Corps. And 10,000 men, kind of in a straight line from point A to point B, we can fill that. As we move out though, and as we start to fan out into this much larger space, we lose that compactness that we had, and we start to spread out a little bit. And now we've got not just point A to point B to fill, but we've got this wide stretch of ground. Meade will eventually hear of this. He will eventually talk to Sickles about this. And this movement, which is happening about between 12 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, no attack thus far. But Meade had been planning for a defensive position through that day. No attack thus far, but now about, 25% of his battle line is not where it's supposed to be. Remember how we talked about you have your battle plan, you've thought it out, you've written it down, and then somebody takes a step forward. So now Meade has to slide that to the side and deal with what he now has before him. How is he going to deal with this? He's just going to adapt. I don't want to get too far into that because that comes this afternoon. But Meade will have to adapt, as any good commander does. All right, we're going to figure it out. Now Lee, on the other hand, was waiting for this early morning attack. He was waiting for things to happen, but it took forever to get Longstreet's men here and on the ground and ready to go. And remember, it's kind of a two-part thing. Longstreet attacks primarily. Ewell does the diversion over here at Culp's Hill. Well, by the time Longstreet's men arrive on the field, they were walking behind the ridge here, heading down south to get in their position about a mile south from where we are. It's the afternoon of July 2nd. Now, Lee's original plan was attack the flank. They pop out of the woods, and now they have part of the Union Army in their front. This was not part of Lee's plan. Lee's plan was get motivated, get here, attack the flank, let's crush the Union Army. So both commanders are dealing with a day in which their original ideas are no longer viable. And that will set the stage for these men as their armies, as their soldiers engage in this fight. They will adapt throughout the day. They will have no choice but to adapt. There's an author that talked about when General Lafayette McLaws came out of the woods and saw the Union Army in their front. And this is a quote from the author, not from McLaws, and I'll paraphrase it. But he said something to the effect of, if McLaws had sworn mighty oaths while having to countermarch earlier in that day, he probably strained his vocabulary at what he saw out in his front. And so it's not just a change for the commanders, the overall Army commanders, it's just change for the guys too. The guys on the field are told one thing, they may be expecting one thing, and now it's something completely different. But that is the nature of battle. And so with that, we're going to conclude our program here. We'll keep you cool, jump back in some air conditioning. Please, honestly though, be careful today and this afternoon. It will be hot. You need to know your limits, bring your water. It's no joke. Sometimes things look a little further than they actually are. But with that, I want to thank everyone for coming out this morning. I want to encourage you to again go on the rest of the programs today. And if I don't see you again, enjoy your stay here in Gettysburg.